Okay, recording Sir Cards.
Good day. We are here to talk about medieval philosophy. To be precise, we will talk about two exciting philosophers in the face of this era of wonder. But before that, let me introduce the speakers for today. Um, the speakers are Jethro Almonte, Aaron Borlas, Martin Dizon, Aidan Serrano, Seth Derillo, and me, Carlo Cadiz. And so we call on Jethro Almonte to introduce the first philosopher of our interest.
Good day, everyone. We will be discussing about the life of Peter Abelard. And for this segment, I'll be telling you his biography. Basically, in his time, during the 12th century, he is a preeminent philosopher, famous of his time, and until now, his works are very well known, together with his uh, uh, other works. Also, he is a famous poet and a musician, and then he was born around 1079 in Lepali, a small town in Brittany. And then during his time in his country, he pursued and became a lecturer. Uh, so he became a lecturer and chose to study and teach for several years. But then after his life had physical complications and sicknesses, he then moved to Brittany for several years. But that did not stop Abelard from teaching, from his passion in teaching. So in 1113, he decided to study theology from his teacher Anselm of Laon, which he learned a lot and yet did not continue his works. Yet did not, and not really his works, but Abelard didn't particularly like or pursue or continue the traditional patterns and teachings of Anselm of Laon, but instead he created and nurtured his own creation about theology or teachings. And then he returned to Paris to teach in Montstay, Genevieve. And then he had many controversies and complications and how do I say this, like problems with, not really problems, like debates and intercourses with Bernard of Clairvaux. And then later, after several years, in year 1142 of April 21st, he died together uh, with the love of his life, Heloise, in Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris. That's all for me. And for the next speaker, he will be talking about the famous works of Peter Abelard with through Navarro. So let's listen.
Okay, thanks, Jethro. So I'll be talking about the works of Abelard. So my discussion on him will be separated into two parts. So the first part is the most famous works, and the second part will be the other works or the rest of his works or his works in general. So let's go to the first part. So we'll talk about his most famous works. Abelard actually has three major famous works that people all know him about, and actually four if you count his autobiography. Not really a work, but it's actually something that came from him. So we'll consider that one in his most famous work. So what are the three most famous works? The first famous work that is that we're talking about today would be the Historia Calamitatum. So the Historia Calamitatum is about addressing a friend, unidentified friend, hoping that this friend will feel better about his suffering after reading Abelard's suffering. So this reminds the readers about Abelard's past fame and paves the way for our return to Paris. So another one of his famous works is actually the letters of Abelard and Heloise. So who is Heloise? So actually Heloise is the lover of Abelard, the most famous lover of Abelard, and the two of them are have been known for being lovers in the world of philosophy. So these letters of Abelard and Heloise were actually discuss issues ranging from their relationship to theological and philosophical matters affecting Heloise nuns at the Paraclete. So Heloise is actually also the second philosopher that we'll be talking about today, and both of them had significant philosophies through their letters. So this is one of his most famous works. And the third most famous works, uh, is the Sikh Etnon. So the Sikh Etnon is a collection or a list of 158 controversial theological questions and compiled writings from authorities, some for Sikh and some opposed none. So the Sikh Etnon was actually all about theology. His um, Abelard's contribution to theology. So, and the fourth most famous work is of course the autobiography. I wouldn't delve on that because we all know what an autobiography is. An autobiography is actually writings about the life of that person. So we all know that Abelard's life is full of philosophy, most especially from his romance with Heloise. So that became one of his most famous works. So let's proceed to the second part of my discussion. So the other works of Abelard. So the general works of Abelard can be categorized further into three major categories. Let's talk about the three major categories being dialectic, ethics, and theology. So let's talk about the first part of his works. So Abelard was mainly concerned also with logic, language, and metaphysics, and philosophy. His two masterworks are Logica and Dialectica, which follow the pattern of Logica Vetus. So Logica means logic, starting with the words to those beginning, and Dialectica means dialectic, and dialectic means the pursuit of the truth of opinion or reasoning or logic. So that's the first category of his works. The second would be ethics. So ethics would be all about we all know what ethics is morality and looking at action whether it is good or bad or evil. So his works are the following. So Ethica Sio Cito Teipsum. So it means ethics or know yourself. So uh, there's also the collationes or conversations, also known as dialogus inter philosophum, and also Ideum et Christianum, or the dialogue of a philosopher with a Jew and a Christian. So this dialogus inter philosophum, Ideum et Christianum, is actually a pair of debates over the nature of happiness and the supreme good. So this philosopher claims to follow only natural reason, first debates the Jew and then the Christian. So this Dialogus Inter Philosophum talks about what is the nature of happiness in the perspective of the Jew and in the perspective of the Christian. So the last category of his works would be philosophical theology. So as we all know from the time of the medieval philosophers, uh, these philosophers like Thomas Aquinas, Albertus Magnus, they all talked about philosophy in relation with theology. So a faith in relation with belief. So uh, um, Abelard was not stray from these ideas. So he also had philosophical contributions in the world of theology. So some of his works were Theologia Sami Boni, or theology that begins with the words the highest good, or Theologia Christiana, which means Christian theology, and Theologia Scholarium, theology that begins with the words in the schools. So the first version of the theology was condemned at the Council of Soissons, and the last work was condemned at the Council of Sens. So most of his work were divided into these three categories, and in the end, we see that Abelard is not stray from the trend of the medieval philosophers. So that's it for his works. Let's proceed. Let's proceed to the next speaker to talk about his type of philosophy and other facts about Peter Abelard. Thank you.
So before I proceed with this thesis in philosophy, I will first talk about the type of philosophy that he studied. Abelard studied many kinds of philosophy. He studied theology under, as what have Jethro have said, under Anselm, and as what have Sir Navarro have said, he studied philosophy of the mind, metaphysics, logic, and ethics. But we will focus more on ethics or moral philosophy of Abelard. So as for his thesis of philosophy, he believes that intention alone determines the morality of an action. He disagrees with the notion that morality is based on consequences or religious doctrines. For example, Abelard um, does not agree with the church wherein the morality of an action is based on the Ten Commandments or the Holy Bible. Because if we base the morality of an action to that, taking another person's life would be, in any situation, is a sin. So Abelard asked what is evil or sinful or wrongful acts. These acts would be with the intention to intentionally offend God. Or we can say that the intention itself is the basis of the morality of an action. But there are, however, many problems or criticisms with this moral philosophy. For example, these questions would be, how can we certain if the intention is evil or not? And how can we make ethical judgments upon that? So that would be all for his thesis in philosophy. So we will now proceed with the next speaker for the relevance of Abelard philosophy in the contemporary world.
So, how relevant is Peter Abelard? He was one of the few philosophers who significantly contributed to philosophy. His works weren't focused solely on the development of scholastic philosophy. He also presented an alternative to the medieval nominalists by using a debate of universal. Now, Abelard was hard to understand. Even his contemporaries had difficulty agreeing with his presuppositions and his concepts. And at last, for this, he was shamed and bound for bringing reason into issues of faith, because there was nobody in Europe at that time who could match his keenness. Now, Thomas Aquinas overshadows his philosophical work. Aquinas' philosophical goal to similar religious issues tended to by Abelard were more following Catholic regulation to such an extent that they respected his prevailing upon respect to their confidence profoundly enough to saint him. Now, as I would see it, Abelard ought to be reevaluated and sainted if that implies anything to history, because Abelard's philosophical accomplishments were astonishing. They had no immediate admittance to Aristotle and tiny Plato if one thinks about it now. And as I've said, it's his keenness that I respect in any case. How he carried on with his life. He became a Benedictine priest, regularly citing non-Christian Stoics like Seneca and Epictetus. Again, not famous for goodness speculations in medieval Catholicism, contrasted with Christian Neoplatonism. Now, in contrast to the standard view of Stoicism, notwithstanding Abelard was exceptionally energetic with regards to life, rationale, reasoning, and even love. So I think that is his greatest and most relevant contribution to philosophy. Now, moving on to the next set of speakers who will introduce the next philosopher of interest.
Thank you so much, Sir Carlo, for that introduction. Well, I am Martin, and today we will be talking about Heloise, the woman of letters, the philosophy of love and friendship. Before we talk about Heloise, she was mentioned earlier in the autobiography of Peter Abelard, and I guess that is a very nice brief description on who Heloise is. Without further ado, I will give the floor to my fellow friend here, Aidan. He will be talking about the autobiography of Heloise.
Hello, good day. Let's start the discussion of Heloise by presenting and discussing her biographical information. So Heloise was born in Argenteuil, uh, in that very suburb. She studied at the Benedictine convent of Argenteuil. That is why she is also called Heloise of Argenteuil. So in that very institution also, where she became the student of Abelard, Peter Abelard, that was discussed earlier. So um, during her teenage years, Heloise was known to be a great poet across France. In fact, she was regarded as one of the most famous poets and writers in France. However, none of her poetic works survive today. So, according also to Abelard, she was multilingual. She knows Latin, Hebrew, and Greek. And lastly, um, Heloise was involved in one of the best-known love tragedies in history. That would be with Peter Abelard. So basically, that love relationship, that love tragedy started as a student-teacher relationship. Then it grew to, to a lover and spouses relationship. Then it eventually ended to a non-religious relationship. So to give a more in-depth information about that, let's start with the student-teacher relationship. So like what I said earlier, Heloise was a student of Abelard at the Benedictine convent of Argenteuil. So at that time, Abelard lasted after Heloise. So she was Abelard lasted Heloise because Heloise was known to be a very pretty woman. And after some time, their relationship grew, and it eventually evolved into a lovers spouses relationship. After that, it one time, um, Heloise became pregnant, and at that time, they were not married yet. And being pregnant without being married at that time was very heavy sin. And considering that the uncle of Heloise was a clergy, Uncle Philbert. So Philbert wanted for them to get married as soon as possible. Um, but Heloise doesn't wanted to get married with Abelard. But eventually, after persuading her, after convincing Heloise, they eventually get married, but with under one condition, and that the marriage will be kept secretly. So after their marriage, Gilbert, being so happy, he bragged their marriage all over the convent, all over France. But however, um, the couple didn't like it because the agreement was that the marriage will be kept privately. So to respond to what Fulbert was bragging, the couple denied it. And Fulbert didn't like the fact that the couples were denying their marriage. So because of his anger, he ordered some men to castrate Abelard during his sleep. So castrate means that to remove a person's testicles. So without having the sexual capacity, um, they eventually decided to part ways, and that is how their relationship ended. It ended in a non to religious relationship. So I'm gonna share one quote on how Heloise shared how he encapsulated her grief using one of her letters. So in this quote, she said that, "You know, beloved, as the whole world knows how much I have lost in you, how at one wretched stroke of fortune that supreme act of flagrant treachery robbed me of my very self in robbing me of you, and how my sorrow for my loss is nothing compared with what I feel for the manner in which I lost in you." So that would be the end of her biographical information. Let's now head on to the major philosophical works and viewpoints that will be discussed by Martin.
Thank you, Aidan. I would agree that the love story of Abelard and Heloise is really tragic from upon knowing and listening to you, Aidan. All I can say that the letter you mentioned earlier is a great start with her works and viewpoints, because we will be talking about her epistolae, her signed letters, her views on love, problemata or problems, and her views on morality. So let's talk about her signed letters. So this is the one of the many things that Heloise is known for, because she summarized the reasons and arguments why she was against in marrying Abelard. So Abelard's dream was to be a philosopher, and Heloise thought that marriage would hinder that. So why would marriage hinder a loving relationship? Because in the medieval times, to be a full-time philosopher is to dedicate time and yourself on research. And afterwards, since most of the philosophies are dogmatic, one must advance to full priesthood in order to fully grasp the philosophy of the medieval era. So Heloise preferred to be Abelard's mistress than wife. So thinking about that, who is the wife if Heloise would be the mistress? The wife would be philosophy. That entails how much Heloise disinterestedly loved him. What do we mean by disinterestedly? That means that Heloise's love for Abelard has no selfish motives, because Heloise wanted Abelard to be a philosopher. Moving on her views on love, she accepted Cicero's views on love. Cicero's views on love is that it is disinterested in anything but the giving of love itself. The lover's love should be disinterestedly, completely unselfish. Uh, it means that it wants nothing but the true happiness of their beloved. And from her acceptance of Cicero's viewpoint, she is then known as the philosopher of love. Now, with the problemata or the problems, Heloise concerns about the theological issues of the nature of faith and the certainty of revealed biblical knowledge. Uh, the problemata is actually addressed to Abelard, and in this, she exerted her critical intellectual influence to pose questions that would immensely challenge Abelard. So we can say that Heloise was one of the critics of Abelard's philosophy. So even though they parted ways from Aidan's reporting of the non too religious era of their relationship, though they parted ways, Heloise still kept her indirect touch with Abelard by being uh, his critics on his works. Now, on the last view of Heloise is that her viewpoint of morality is that it is not the deed itself, but the intention of the doer that makes the sin. So it's all about the intention. It's because she thinks that equity weighs not what is done, but the spirit in which it is done. So her views on morality, responsibility echoed Abelard's view. The moral value of an act depends on its intentions. So it's like her viewpoint on morality still came from Abelard, but with a few tweaks. So after talking about her views on morality, I would like to uh, tell you or let you discover the influences of her philosophy through Seth.
Thank you, Martin. This is Seth Derillo. Today, I'm going to report on the relevance of Heloise's philosophy in the modern day. Doing that, I'm also going to give you a brief background of her works during the medieval age and what those letters had become in the contemporary age. Heloise, uh, she was a French nun, philosopher, writer, and a scholar. She had become an important intellectual leader within the medieval world. Heloise played a crucial role in uh, French literary history, and within the development of feminist representation. There have been few of her letters survived. Some are now considered to be a foundational monument of French literature from the late 13th century onwards. Uh, One in every of her correspondence, which was Bildungsroman, uh, and a model of the classical epistolary genre, and which influenced writers as diverse as Chrétien de Troyes, Madame de Lafayette, Chaudelus de la Close, Rousseau, and Dominic Aury. She is known in history and popular culture for her romance and correspondence with the leading medieval logician and theologian, theologizer Peter Abelard, as said earlier, who became her teacher, colleague, uh, collaborator, and husband. She is understood for her gift in reading and writing poems, music, literature, uh, critical thinking, and posing some challenging inquiries to Abelard, like those in the Problemata Heloise or the issues of Heloise. Her surviving letters are considered a, found, a foundation of French and European literature and primary inspiration for the practice of courtly love. She is a crucial figure and had become the woman's representation in scholarship and is thought for her controversial portrayals of gender and marriage, uh, which became the event of contemporary feminism. Her letters had developed an ethical philosophy in which intent is centrally placed as critical for determining the moral correctness or sin of an action. This is what Sir Martin has said before. What she said. She claims that for it is not the deed itself, but the intention of the doer that makes the sin. Equity weighs not what is done, but the spirit in which it is done. So this influence has made Abelard's intention-centered ethics described in his later work Ethica, and had served as a foundation to the development of the ontological ethics of intentionalist ethics in medieval philosophy prior to Aquinas. Alexander Pope followed and was inspired by English translation that the poet John Hughes made using the interpretation by Roger de Rabutin. There have been lots of letters which were lost and a few were preserved and been translated in English and a few foreign languages. In conclusion, we have heard how she played an important role in the philosophy world. She was so strong and intellectual that made some philosophers to be born and inspired through her literary works. Who knows, we could be one of those who will serve the purpose of developing more and help our culture known for our own literary works. Thank you. That's all.
So, in addition to what said have presented, um, one of the influences of Heloise also was on Abelard's ethics, and the main core of that ethic is that intention is the moral yardstick of an action, like what Aaron has said earlier. It is not on the consequences or on religious doctrines. It is on the intention itself. Moreover, like what have said Seth said earlier, Heloise also immensely influenced the French literary history. She was regarded as a foundational monument of French literature from the late 13th century onward. So some of the philosophers that she influenced was Victor Cousin, John Hugh Alexander Pope, and many more. And lastly, for the influence of Heloise, Heloise was a great influence on Abelard's Historia Calamitatum. Historia Calamitatum is one of Abelard's most famous works, and in that work, um, um, it is stated the justifications of on why Heloise didn't want to marry Abelard. So this is best presented in one quote. She said that I tried to dissuade thee from our marriage, from an ill-starred bed. I preferred to love to wedlock, freedom from chains. So why did Heloise don't like to get married to Abelard? So this is so because she perceived her marriage with Abelard as a sin because she was the only one benefiting from it. This is in the sense that marriage would definitely allow Abelard to lose his job, and losing his job would mean that Abelard would not be a full-time philosopher anymore, and that is against the true good that Heloise wants for Abelard. And also, this is why she viewed marriage differently from pure love and devotional love. And lastly, that justifies why she seemed to want to be a mistress rather than his wife. So again, from one of her letters to Abelard, she said that God knows I never sought anything in you except yourself. I wanted simply you, nothing of yours. I looked for no marriage bond, no marriage portion, and it was not my own pleasures and wishes I sought to gratify, as you well know, but yours. Now, Martin will be presenting what are the relevance of her philosophy to the present climate.
Thank you, Aidan. So, upon reflecting on what Helois's philosophy is all about, we think that she pushes the development of feministic philosophy because she was one of the women philosophers in the medieval philosophy who paved way for the development of feminist philosophy. Her unique and somewhat clamored view on marriage heavily affected and influenced the development of modern feminism. If you guys don't have any idea, uh, from the ancient Greek to the medieval era, women philosophers or women who tried philosophizing were viewed as a joke, mainly because they believed in the Bible, especially when they said that women are only a part of men and men are made in the likeness of God. Furthermore, we have concluded that the philosophy of Heloise, she implies an idea that philosophy must be practiced. She believed that philosophy must be a practice in words and in deeds. Now, this was her criticism to Abelard because she believes that he does not put into practice his ideas, teachings, especially on love, morality, and intentions. That's why she calls him a hypocrite. So that concludes our topic for Heloise. But before we leave, I have a few questions for everyone, if that's okay with you, because I like our discussion for tonight. And I would like to say that everyone is, I guess, free to answer. Uh, with the line or one of the letters said by Aidan earlier, God knows I never sought anything in you except yourself. I wanted simply you, nothing of yours. It struck me, and I came into a position where I wanted to ask, like, upon learning the side of Abelard and Heloise, did you guys think that the reason of their love story's tragedy is necessary?
So, me, I would like to answer. So, basically, their story is a tale that proves that no matter the circumstances, love will always prevail if the two lovers are willing to fight for the relationship. So, this is seen in the first letter, where little biographical information is offered for both Heloise and Abelard. And this alone is a clear indication that the letters describe a relationship between two people who are distant from one another. Now, despite this, their feeling for each other remained alive and even seemed to grow stronger, and their desire to remain faithful to their partner. Now, we can say that their love is eternal. Uh, for Abelard expressed his wish to be buried near Heloise. No, this is a practice common among the married couples, and it bears a symbolic meaning. Yan, thank you.
So let me speak about that. I personally think that that their sacrifice or their tragedy was not a necessary tragedy. I think that it was very close-minded of them. They didn't look at the bigger picture of things. They didn't take into account the situation better. Because looking at their story, there were a lot of things that struck to me. First of all, when they first began, it was a student-teacher relationship. When I heard about that, I was like, what? It's a student and a teacher? So that the first fact that I knew about it, I was shocked. So then another thing was the uncle wanted to brag about their marriage, and when they denied the marriage, the uncle wanted to castrate Abelard. So that did also not make sense to me. Why would you want to castrate someone for denying something that you're bragging about? Is that a valid action to do against someone? You want revenge just because you were denied of something you were boasting about? So that was another thing that struck to me. And then another thing that struck to me was the main problem of the relationship. The main problem of the relationship was that Heloise did not want to butt in to Abelard's career goals or aspirations for philosophy, but Abelard wanted to marry her. It was Abelard's decision, Abelard's choice to want to marry Heloise, and Heloise was the one who denied that because she assumed that Abelard would not be successful in philosophy if they were to be married. That marrying would be chaining themselves to one another. When marriage is in the modern view, at least, it's not chaining yourself to a person. It's more of a decision, a choice to want to be with that person, not a chain that will force you to be with that person forever, but it's a choice that you are willing to make. And Abelard wanted that choice. He was willing to make that choice, but Heloise was assuming enough to think that Abelard would not succeed. But if you think about it, that in their era, they were talking about uh, philosophers have to be priests first. So people like Albertus Magnus or Thomas Aquinas, they were priests first before they were philosophers. But there were also medieval philosophers that weren't priests. It's like take Robert Gostes or Roger Bacon, who were both in line with philosophy, but more on scientific, not on theology. They were more on scientific. So you could become a philosopher without being a priest. So it doesn't add up that you have to be celibate or you have to be a priest in order to be a philosopher. So I didn't think that that was a good argument for Heloise to have chosen to sacrifice their love. So, and then there was this issue of castration. If Abelard did not have any sexual abilities. So I think that if we were to look at their love, apparently, we are not able to know the whole gist of things because we were not there in their time. But apparently, their love was pure or agape, pure, not eros, which is lust, but it was pure and everlasting love. So it's supposed to transcend the level of lust. So I don't think that sexual would also be a problem for them. So if you look at their supposedly tragic love story, it isn't really that tragic because it doesn't make sense at all. So I guess it was a limitation to their time and to their era. So people were more close-minded in their era than we are now in the modern world. So I guess that's it for them. That's my thoughts about that topic.
Hello, I want to add. I tend to somewhat agree to what John have said, but to state my opinion on the question as to whether that love tragedy was necessary or not. I think that love tragedy is they
Uh,
entered.
Aidan, I think we lost you a bit. Can you repeat what you said earlier?
Hello,
Yeah. The
hello.
connection is good now.
Okay,
Repeat
okay.
it, please. Thank you.
So for my opinion, as to whether that love tragedy was necessary or not, I tend to agree to what John have said earlier that it is not really necessary. So of course, there are advantages of that said love tragedy. It could be that the two, quote unquote, became closer to God because they entered the clergy. But I believe that um, if that love tragedy did not happen, Heloise would have produced more works with Abelard. Works regarding love, on marriage, on family, on morality. And we would have witnessed and we would have more information on the philosophy of Heloise if that love tragedy did not transpire, at least in my opinion. So um, I think that that love tragedy was not necessary because of that.
Thank you, Aidan. Let's move on to this next question. No? I just need an answer. Okay, an answer for everyone. So, did you think that their breakup was worth it? Personally, I think that it wasn't because I believe in Aidan on what he said that if ever that they did not break up, Abelard and Heloise, known for their love letters, would have created more letters that would make them more famous. So, what about you guys? What do you think?
So I have an answer for it. So in context of the letters of Abelard and Heloise, the one that I mentioned a while ago about love is the first one. So second one is about religion. Now, both Abelard and Heloise find refuge in a religion after they are forced to separate from one another because they are surrounded by other people who have the same interests and help them become more faithful and made them think more and more about religion and divinity. Now, the ideas about God and forgiveness appear frequently in their letters, and they both admit that they try to live as righteous as possible and that they try to control their feelings and urges. Despite this, okay, they both admitted that their love for one another is stronger than their love for God, and they both feel guilty of not being completely honest to those around them about their feelings. Now, in the The third theme of their letter is redemption. Both Heloise and Abelard admitted that they need to be forgiven for the sins that they have done. And in his letters to Heloise, Abelard urges her to seek forgiveness and to change her ways in order to be saved by God. Because Abelard sees Heloise's attitude towards God and the cloister as a hurdle in her path towards redemption. That's
How about you, Sir Aaron? What do you think? Was their breakup worth it?
I actually believe that it is also not worth it. From a sense that, let's say, they broke up because of what what the, let's say, the common sense that is happening, that is at that era. Yes. So the the let's say, the how the mind works at at the age at that era is somehow different from the modern. Let's say, let's say, they have more simplified ways of thinking, if I may say. So they think that lives revolves more around in, let's say, religion, government, and, let's say, ego. So I before I go to if it's worth it, I wanted to say that the breakup is bound to happen, if I may add, because um when Abelard was frustrated, the breakup is bound to happen because religion must come first. I believe must come first because, let's say, they all believe that a man should, or humankind must procreate. Since Abelard was castrated, he couldn't have done it anymore. So that may have affected his ego. If I that say his sense of a man has been parang nasira or bumaba dahil sa nangyaring castration or naging neutered siya. So mas lalo nag-epekto siya sa relationship nila. Doon din papasok ang ego. Like, parang dating nun hindi na siya, it's not selfless or unconditional love, since mas naging priority niya ang self niya kaysa sa yung mahal niya. So, kung masasabihin ko ay worth it or hindi, I can say na, yeah, it's not worth it, since tama nga si Aidan, makakaproduce pa nga sila ng mga philosophical works na hindi nila na-produce. Pero in a way, I think it's worth it, since it's possible na yung mga intentions or iniisip nilang moral philosophy ay nanggaling sa breakup nila. Masabi natin, tulad nga sa nangyari na after breakup, naisip na ni Heloise na yung intentions matter the most, since yun nga, yung pagmamahal niya, hindi niya napakita kay Abelard since naghiwalay na sila. And I think na Abelard shared the same sentiments, since ayun nga, minahal niya ni Heloise pero hindi niya natuloy, since nawala na yung dignidad niya bilang isang lalaki. Pumasok pa siya sa church at i-continue yung philosophy. Pero may kita din natin yung pagmamahal, since si Heloise, pinagpapatuloy niya pa yung criticisms niya o pagsuporta sa philosophy ni Abelard, which is nagbunga nga yung moral philosophy na pagiging intentionalist. That's all. Thank you.
Great insight, Sir Aaron. How about you, Sir Jethro?
Hello, everyone. First of all, before I mention my answer, I would like to tell na from this topic, of course, there's no correct answer, as we can say, because depending on the perspective and belief of what could have happened is because it's basically limited by our own knowledge, and basically we don't have the right capacity to predict everything clearly if those things were to happen. But if I were to be asked on my perspective about Abelard and Heloise breakup, whether it is worth or not, I personally believe that it is worth it because for Heloise and Abelard, um I believe that Heloise did the right thing, and Abelard also did the right thing to break up from one another, because I think that carnal intentions of Abelard can be very oppressive and destructive if they continue it, in a sense, because of course we never know. But the point that I wanted to make is that the risk is high. Although Abelard is already castrated, he no longer has genitals. But more than that, as a philosopher, Abelard himself should also, just as Heloise mentioned, should uphold or cling to his words instead of being a hypocrite in a way. So I think the act of Heloise and Abelard towards breaking up, or their breakup, is basically worth it, because it gave room for them to focus on themselves and uh grow grow without the other, because for themselves to fully practice and apply, and um for them to fully practice and apply what they have learned, it should start from themselves, because before they should teach it to others, of course they must have been able to use that knowledge in a way that they can express towards others, that would start from themselves. So for me, I think it's worth it. It's a very somewhat unpopular opinion, but I think it's very worth it, because it gave them, it released the risk of having, I released it, I believe at least that it removed the risk of having more problems because of Abelard's carnal intention, and just as Jay mentioned earlier, Heloise's mistakes about making Abelard to be a philosopher just by for just I not just but by being a theologian as well. So I think those things are those stuff. Heloise's side that she wants Abelard to be a theologian, to be a priest by the way, sorry, to be a priest, and Abelard's carnal intentions. I think those two things are some things that needs to be stopped for them uh, to fully exert their potential and growth for one another in doing their dreams. Though it may sound tragic and sad for them to have, because they will not be seeing one another for a very long time. But from what I can see, it's something that uh, they should give up, or is already worth it, because they both need time for themselves and have a moment of growth uh, towards the weaknesses that they have done and the problems they have created from their past. So that's basically my answer.
Lastly, Sir Seth, what are your uh, thoughts about it?
My thoughts that about those two is that I think it's worth, but at that certain era or century, they might have been afraid to those who surround them, because the way they're living at that time is different than our time. So I think uh, sin so I think that Abelard and Heloise, mm, pretty much worth that they let their love prevail, but it's always though, because they might have produced, and as you guys said earlier, they might have been more famous and well known right now. That's all.
Thank you so much, Sir Seth. No, uh, it was a fun discussion. Don't you guys think? I personally I learned a lot from Peter Abelard and Heloise. So I would like to say thank you for everyone who attended today's talk. It was a good discourse. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Salamat.
Bye.
you.